Hello there and welcome to this bonus episode of the Terrace Scottish Football Podcast. My name is Craig Telfer and right this second I am joined by a man who resembles a cheese string that's been given human life for 24 hours. It's Fraser Clarke. Hello Fraser.
Hello, is that the picture of me and John Mackay that really exacerbated my sort of lankiness?
It's exactly what I was looking at when I came up with that introduction. You were excellent on Scotland tonight, I have to say that. You were excellent on Scotland tonight. Very good very proud actually to see you, the guy that I do these daft podcasts with, actually making a name for himself on late night television. So it's pretty cool to see that, and you were very good on it. But yes, you did look like a big cheese string.
I haven't watched it. I couldn't watch it. I was a complete bag of nerves. So see, when I did it, I was fine. And then I got home and I just started thinking about everything. And I went downstairs. I put on a racing video from like earlier this year in America. I turned off my phone, left it upstairs, and just sat in the darkness watching 50 minutes of American Superbike racing and not thinking about what I'd done.
So you wouldn't have seen this. You mean it was very, very good. You know, when it comes to Dumbarton, you're the best in the business to talk about them, and I think there was no better person to discuss the current situation at the Rock than yourself. However, there was a very funny bit right at the very end of the interview. The camera holds on you. Just ever so slightly, John Mackay wraps at the interview, the camera holds on you, and your eyes just start darting about before it cuts and then goes on to the next bit. So that was really funny. It's like you'd been holding it together for so long, and just when it finishes, boom, that's when you cracked a bit.
I heard about that from my girlfriend's mother. She told me about that. It's that thing. See, when I'm talking, it's absolutely fine. It's probably the same in the podcast. See, when I'm talking, and if people watch it, I'm absolutely fine because I'm talking. See, as soon as someone else is talking, I don't know what to do with myself. Like, do I touch my face? Do I start cracking my joints? Like, nervous habits kick in. So, the shifty eyes are one of them. Like Action Man with his eagle eyes.
Don't worry, man. I was doing some filming at work. We were doing a video about a study into creating some sort of device that monitors the level of pesticides in water in Kenya, and it's quite a nice story because it's quite low cost and quite low tech. And it's the sort of thing, if it can be upscaled, it can do pretty well. Anyway, we interviewed one of the academics involved who explained the process behind the sensors and how it sends data to this machine that sends a text message out to people. And after we finished the interview, he actually put his head in his hands like that. And I've never seen anyone finish up an interview like the guy who'd been class explaining exactly what it was, and he was able to break down quite complex, well, say like for a layman, quite complex terms. And I thought it was very good, but just when he finished, that's how he finished up. So you weren't quite as bad as that. That has been cut from the video. That will not make it into the final edit. But I think it was. I've never seen anyone react like that.
When I'm next on Scotland Tonight talking about Dumbarton being taken over by a Saudi billionaire, and I'm not entirely sure how to word it due to the kind of ethics of such a thing, that's how I'll end it. I'll just put my head in my hands and collapse.
That's good. Just keep on. Just keep when it says thanks, Fraser. Just keep nodding, smiling. And then no in-laws will be making fun of you. But Fraser, listen, we're not here to go through frame by frame your appearance in Scotland tonight. No. We are here for something very special. Now, listeners, if you cast your minds back a couple of months, you could not have logged on to Twitter without hearing the term Barclaysmen. Effectively, it was people reminiscing about perhaps some of the players that maybe not flew under the radar, but perhaps aren't as fondly thought of now, but at the time, these were absolutely phenomenal players. And the players we're talking about, Michu, Amir Zaki, Maynor Figueroa, players that played for Wigan and Hull. Now, these are the sort of players, but specifically during the Barclays sponsorship of the English Premier League. And Fraser and I got talking around this time and said, wouldn't it be really interesting if we did something similar, but it was for players who played in the lower leagues during the Irn-Bru sponsorship of the Scottish Football League. So months after that trend has passed, Fraser and I are going to be building our ultimate Irn-Bru Men 11. Players who played in the lower leagues between 2007 and 2013 during the soft drink sponsorship of the SFL. And we're going to put together our favourite players from that period. Not necessarily the best 11, because that would be boring, but just a lot of these guys are flawed geniuses, and that's what makes it fun. And we're going to go through from goalkeeper all the way to striker and build a team of players. So how do you feel going into this?
Really excited. So this is my era. This was my era. So between 2007 and 2013, I would have been between primary 6th and 4th year at school, I think, off the top of my head. Like, that's the era that you really start to understand football, I think. You start to really get into it, and you also start to notice the other players that you like. So doing this was just great. And then like looking at your team, and I was going through my wee team that I did, like pulled together, the amount of guys that I left out, I was just like, oh yeah, you could have gone in it. Like, just really good fun.
Aye, it was quite tricky because so from a period of time, like I'm obviously, I say a wee bit, a great deal older than you are. So it was funny for me. Just there are some things you can go back into the past and remember things, and sometimes you go back into the past and you really have to. Right, I really need to read up on this. So my team is basically picked on players who I remember the best. And they might not necessarily be the best players or the most exciting, but the players I remember the best from this era, and I think who if you were to put them in a team together would, I wouldn't say how functional, I'm not sure how functional it would be, but I do think it'd be a lot of fun, a lot of excitement, and a lot of frustration with some of these guys. And I do think there's quite a bit of an overlap between our team. I think there's about 5 or 6 players that we have both picked that will go into our respective 11s, but that's part of the fun. And I'm sure there'll be people listening to this who will look back in that era, and there are players that immediately spring to their mind, and hopefully these players that they're thinking of are the ones that we are going to discuss.
And I picked a lot of my players based on looks, stroke, general sort of that time vibes, because I noticed a lot of my players are bald.
A lot of my players are overweight. I think there was something about that period as well. I can still remember the big arm patches, the big Irn-Bru arm patches, baggy shirts were quite that was quite a trend. I know people think that was quite a 90s thing, but it definitely continued into the 2000s, and particularly into the 2010s. And I think it's only been over the last 10 years, maybe since Irn-Bru stopped their sponsorship of the competition, that shirts have become slimmer and slimmer. But no, these are. Aye, a lot of fun to be had with putting this together. But we've been talking enough, Fraser. Let's get on to goalkeeper. Who have you put for your goalie? So
I have picked someone from my own club on the basis of general vibes, but also I think there's a couple more Dumbarton players coming up. But Dumbarton are quite an Irn-Bru team.
Yes.
We won the 3rd division in 2008-9, and then we won the playoffs in 2011-12. So like prime Irn-Bru features quite a lot of Dumbarton. I've gone for Stephen Grindley. Now, you look at Stephen Grindley's career of round about that time, right? Dumbarton, Queen of the South, Ayr United. Like, that's a really solid Irn-Bru career if you want to do that. He was in the Ayr United team that won the playoffs, he was in the Dumbarton team that won the playoffs, and he was in Queen of the South squad that got to the Scottish Cup final, albeit he didn't play in that game. Those are 3 quite Irn-Bru-ish teams. So all 3, for example, had Surridge kits.
Fucking hell! I can actually see it just now. It's probably been years since I've actually thought about Surridge, but now you've mentioned it, I can see the manufacturer's logo clear as day in the recesses of my skull.
They made a lot of kits for a lot of teams. They were kind of the Joma of the sort of more modern era, because Joma obviously ended up making just about everyone's kit. But I think the aspect about Stephen Grindley as well is that he, in my mind, must have been a hell of a lot older than he was in reality. So when he played for Dumbarton when we got promoted to the Championship, he must have been about 32 or 33, which isn't a great deal older than I am at the moment. But I always looked at him and thought he looked like an old man.
It's the lack of hair.
Yeah, but just things like the World Cup boots or the Copas, like whatever boots he had at that time, he just felt like such a player from that era. And I think if we're going to talk about flawed, like Stephen Grindley is definitely in that category, because I saw him have one of the best games I've ever seen any goalkeeper have. And you speak to any Arbroath fan or any Suns fan about this, in the 2011-12 playoffs at Gayfield in the second leg, Suns were leading 2-1 from the first leg, and he was absolutely unbeatable in that second leg. But by the same token, I saw him punch a ball into his own net from a corner that season when we lost 4-0 at home to East Fife. He regularly used to come for crosses and like kind of catch opposition players' heads instead, and just the ball would be lost. He did not enjoy crosses. He couldn't play particularly well short, so like he was a phenomenal long kicker of a ball. I think if you spend as long at the Rock as he did, then you have to be good at kicking into a wind. He's also a really good golfer, so he was quite good at judging trajectories and things like that when he was launching the ball. But I can't imagine Stephen Grindley, I don't know, playing a short goal kick, inside the 6-yard box like the sort of style is now. So I felt he was very much a player from that time, and a player that you don't get nowadays. There is no modern day Stephen Grindley. There is no Ladbrokes, Cinch, or whoever sponsors it Stephen Grindley, I don't think.
Who do you think would be the closest equivalent, off the top? I'm going to put you on the spot a wee bit there, but who would be the closest equivalent to a Stephen Grindley plying his trade just now in the lower leagues?
Mark McCallum, maybe?
Right, okay.
Maybe. Like, he's got a good long kick on him. He can maybe look a bit clumsy and a bit big and a bit cumbersome at times, but he also has games where he's unbeatable.
Yeah. That's it. Well, you've gone for a bit of a rough diamond. I think I perhaps... Maybe with this pick, I've gone. We talked about a lot of the team are flawed players or overweight players. I think I've actually just gone for the very best goalkeeper who was available during that period, and that's David McGurn, who was in that between 2007 and 2013. He had one season at Greenock Morton, but I think that most people associate McGurn with his time at Raith Rovers. And when I think of my time watching football, and I think of the best goalkeepers, McGurn would definitely be one of them. And I think he's the sort of goalkeeper that could win a club 6 or 7 points, and it was a pivotal figure for Raith Rovers. And there's two examples that I want to give. There's one, it was a game against Ayr United where there's a guy called Steve Howie that was playing for the Honest Men. He forces McGurn into a triple save. And I'm not sure if you've seen the clip, but it's genuinely jaw-dropping how good this goalkeeping is. The reflexes, the speed, the just instinctive to boot the ball away. And there's a great bit, I think it might be if it's not the first or the second attempt, but how he shoots and actually has his hand in the air like he's turned to celebrate, only to turn and see that McGurn saved it and then makes a subsequent save after that. It is absolutely ridiculous goalkeeping. And there's another example of that. It was a game against Dunfermline Athletic. Rovers went on to win this match 2-0, but he pulls off a save towards the end of the game, It's just, again, so audacious. One of those saves that just, how on earth are you getting to that? To claw the ball away, and then immediately Rovers go up the park and score to make it 2-0. Those are the kind of things that McGurn could do for you. And for me, and perhaps over the last 15 years, I think he is the best goalkeeper to have played in the lower leagues.
Yeah, I think, this is sort of testament to him, but I don't know if you saw the Aston Villa game at the weekend, and Emiliano Martinez made that save.
They're debating whether or not this is one of the greatest saves in the history of the English Premier League.
Yes, and when I watched it back, it reminded me of the McGurn save, just in terms of the ridiculous strength from close range, the way he moves his body. And again, Martinez is like, I'm just going to say he's a big guy. Obviously, he's a big guy, but you've got your keepers like De Gea who have got that more athletic, more limmy build, whereas Martinez has like that bigger build, a wee bit more like McGurn, and like the flexibility to pull off the save. I looked at that and I thought, that reminds me of David McGurn. And that's ridiculous to say about a guy who spent pretty much his entire career in the Scottish First Division, as it was at the time.
It's funny because I think that certainly during his first time, his first spell as Raith Rovers manager, I think that was a bit of a black mark against John McGlynn. It was a crunch game against Dunfermline Athletic. It was effectively, I can't quite remember the circumstances, and forgive me for not having done my research properly, but Raith Rovers needed to win in order to it was a winner-takes-all game. Raith Rovers needed to win it, but instead John McGlynn picked Andy McNeil to play against David McGurn, benched him for it, and that was seen as a massive flaw, because I think McNeil subsequently made a mistake in the match. Ultimately, Dunfermline Athletic went up and Raith Rovers didn't, and you're right, that's perhaps one of the great shames, is that McGurn never got to play in the top flight, because he's a fantastic goalkeeper, and he is currently the goalkeeper coach at Kelty Hearts.
Yes, he is, because I wrote about him in a programme that I sent about 48 hours ago.
Fantastic. Now, we'll just check. We've both picked a goalkeeper. You're legally obliged to pick a goalkeeper, but what formation have you gone for with this team?
I've gone for a straight up 4-4-2, although one of my wingers may also be a striker, and I just wanted to squeeze him in because he can play there.
I'm the same. I've gone for a 4-4-2, but maybe I think I might be playing two left wingers. But certainly one of the wingers that I've picked didn't really matter where you played him, because he could just give him the ball and he can do what he wants with it. But we'll come on to right fullback. Fraser, who have you got?
So I picked someone who could also play as a winger or as a central midfielder or at the end of his career as a central defender, but I'm going to play him at right back, and that's Jamie Stevenson.
Stevenson, wow. Now we're talking. Jamie Stevenson, of course, perhaps most famous for having been an Allo Athletic youth player who was spotted doing keepy-uppies on holiday by a scout for Real Mallorca, and then was subsequently, 2 years that he spent on the island before returning and signing for Greenock Morton. But yeah, I think is he still playing for Berwick Rangers? Did he leave Berwick Rangers recently?
I think he might have left them recently, but he still played against us in the Challenge Cup in August.
Amazing, absolutely amazing. Yeah, so why did you pick in fact, I know why you picked him. Please enlighten us. So why did you pick Jamie Stevenson?
Played in a Surrey Airdrie kit, so that's a big tick.
One.
That's number one. But the second one, and this maybe is going off the whole vibes thing or just going back to my childhood or whatever. Whenever I got a programme and whenever we were playing a team that Jamie Stevenson played for, it obviously had an excerpt about the fact that he was signed by Mallorca after doing keepy uppies. And that's just like something that sticks in my mind. It's like you could have a pal at the game. You'd be like, see that guy playing for East Stirlingshire? I used to play for Real Mallorca.
I remember him as well. I had a really good look at him when he played for... this would have been Irn-Bru. It was Jim McInally's East Stirlingshire team. The side that they were really... In fact, that would have been the same season that Dumbarton won the third division. Stennismuir went up via the playoffs. Stevenson was playing... I think he playing... He certainly was playing as an attacker in that side, but that was a really good East Stirlingshire team. Brian Graham playing up front for them at that period. Yeah, Stevenson was a really good player. I think that, obviously, with the stuff about Real Mallorca, we're having a laugh about that, but I just feel as though that he was certainly talented enough to play, probably like a lot of these players we're discussing, talented enough to play at a higher level, but maybe just didn't fancy it enough.
Yeah, I always wonder what the case is with some of them, and we'll come on, especially in more attacking positions, that it's either just not worked out for them or they've just thought, no, you know what, I don't fancy the full-time thing. But Stevenson, I mean, he was playing in the Championship when he went up to the Championship with Airdrie, and then I think he stuck around with, did he go to Cowdenbeath for a season after that, or is that off the top of my head? Like, he was maybe slightly beyond his prime at that point, and you're thinking, I know he had the spell at Morton, but you're somebody who probably should have spent the prime of your career not with East Stirling and not with Airdrie in League One, but actually playing at the top end of the Championship. And then the fact that he evolved as a player, so you saw him go from being this winger, I think he plays as an attacking midfielder quite a fair bit in his earlier career, to being like a really dependable fullback for Jim McInally at Peterhead.
Yeah.
That's testament to the sort of player he was. I guess there's that element that is he a flawed genius in terms of he was clearly a very talented footballer, really good taker of set pieces and things like that, I remember as well. He had all the attributes. Obviously something just stopped him maybe ever kicking on. I don't think he ever played in the Premier League, did he?
I don't think so. But it's interesting you say, maybe being a flawed genius. I think that there's obviously, he used to play for Real Mallorca, but once you get beyond that, then he as you say there, his time at Park Taylor, particularly at Peterhead, just a really solid professional. I think that certainly latterly, he never came across as the sort of player who would have been difficult to deal with or a bit of a fanny or had a bit of an ego about him. He just looked like someone who would pitch up on the Saturday, get the job done down the road.
And so fit as well. I mean, I think he's round about 40, and to still be bombing up and down the right-hand side at 37, 38, 39, 40, it's testament again. So like a guy who certainly evolved into being a model pro, and you just wonder, like, how far could he have gone? Could he have, if something had gone differently at Mallorca, if he hadn't got injured, if there'd been a different coach, if there'd been a different manager, something like that, I don't know if it was homesickness as well or something got him, because there's all the, the romance of going to play for Mallorca, and then I guess there's a reality of being a 19-year-old, 20-year-old boy in a country that's foreign, where you don't speak the language, certainly not at first, where your family are away back to their lives, your pals are all the way back to their lives, that probably is quite isolating. So it's just, it'd just be really interesting to know why it didn't work out, and if there's any chance that it could have done it. Did something click, something go wrong, and he could have actually, he could have been starring in La Liga at 36. There
was a View from the Terrace VT with him when he talked about that. They interviewed him and asked him, and I can't remember what he said. But I'm sure it was really interesting. See if you can dig it out on YouTube. Now, you've gone for a player at right back who has got a bit of an interesting story, who's got a bit of pizzazz, who's got a bit of flash about him. I have gone for the complete opposite, and I have gone for Albion Rovers fullback Alan Reid. And I think that is the least interesting player who's going to come up out the 22, or however many it is that you and I pick for this. I think that Alan Reid is the consummate company man. I think he latterly had a spell at Stennismuir, Caledonian Braves, Cambuslang Rangers. He's back playing for Albion Rovers at the moment. And I think that he has racked up between his first spell, which is very, very long indeed. I think it must have been certainly over a decade anyway, He's racked up around 400 appearances for the club in all competitions, which is fantastic. And I suppose I picked Reid, maybe not so much about his qualities as a player. And he was, you'll have seen him plenty of times, just a very steady, jobbing fullback. I say he's a jobber. He spent most of his time at Albion Rovers, so he wasn't a jobber. But do you know what I mean? Like, not very flash. But I suppose I picked him because of what the journey that he went on with Albion Rovers more than anything else. Because they were really during the Irn-Bru era, perhaps the least fashionable club in the Scottish Football League at that period. They were managed, particularly during the boom time, by Paul Martin, part of the... Well, you can come on and give us your thoughts, right? Obviously, your former manager at Dumbarton, part of the Crazy Gang team that won promotion in 2011 into the second division. And they were part of the team that stayed in the second division. I think in Albion Rovers history, previously, anytime they'd been promoted, they were immediately relegated, but they managed to stay in the second division. And he was part of the team that beat Ayr United 7-2 as well, which is still such a celebrated result for the Rovers. So that's why I've gone for Alan Reid. Not so much about Reid himself, but for what he represented with Albion Rovers during the Irn-Bru period.
Yeah, I think when I touched on Dumbarton being one of the Irn-Bru clubs, I think Albion Rovers are very much another one of them.
I think
and
so,
actually,
yeah.
A big reason for that is the fact that both clubs just seem to share players for a good period of time. Like, our rejects went to Albion Rovers and their half-decent players came to us, and that just went on for a very long time. And that happened with Paul Martin. Like, Paul Martin's time at Dumbarton was largely rubbish. I mean, if you look at his win percentage, I think it might even be below 20%. And then he went to Albion Rovers and did a really, really good job there. Yeah. And he wasn't the only one. Like, a lot of players left Dumbarton. We'll potentially come on to him later, but John Gemmell being one, when he left Dumbarton, he'd shown flashes of being a good player. He went to Albion Rovers and he made himself an icon. He's probably the sort of the exciting side of that Albion Rovers team. Alan Reid is not. Yes. In the nicest way possible. He just, you know what? Sometimes you don't want an exciting right back. Sometimes you just want a guy who's going to turn up, never be injured, very rarely get sent off or anything like that, and just do a job. And that was him. And he actually, this kind of sums up the excitement of Alan Reid. His testimonial was against Dumbarton.
Yeah, Celtic 11 was unavailable that day, so they had to get the Suns in. I suppose that Crazy Gang team, because they must have been the most modestly, I'm going by budgets, they must have had the smallest budget in the division, or maybe actually in the Scottish Football League then. But they were able to put together that Crazy Gang spirit. I think that guys like Kieran Donnelly, guys like Stevie Canning, John Gemmell that you mentioned, Alan Reid, they were able to basically hunt and kill for Paul Martin. I think they really, really enjoyed working with him. He was able to bring the best out of them, and they were able to translate that to a successful football team. A team of Albion Rovers means that year, like ahead of, in 2011, ahead of the likes of like a pretty good Queen's Park team, I'm sure, that year. They were able to go up ahead of them, which is just testament to Paul Martin's skill set as a manager. And it's a bit strange that we haven't seen him in management since. When did he walk away from the Rovers? That's certainly over a decade anyway.
Yeah, I wonder if there's an element where he just thought, that was great, and then you draw a line under it. And there's no point trying to chase that or anything else. You just go, you know what, that was a period of my life. I know he's got a business, or he certainly had a business when he was at Albion Rovers, like a roofing business or something. So I don't know if it's, you know what, I had a phenomenal time at Albion Rovers. And I remember speaking to Alan Adamson about it at Dumbarton and saying, why have you never got into management? And he said, because I'd never taught what I did at Dumbarton. I'd be chasing, trying to get that feeling, but I'd never be able to do a better job than I did there. And I wonder if it's like Paul Martin feels fulfilled by what he achieved there. And then it's time to concentrate on stuff away from football. Yeah,
I think he left with health reasons as well. And I suppose if you're certainly as enthusiastic a manager as Paul Martin was, then maybe just taking a step back from it is perhaps for the best. But if we've gone for Alan Reid and Jamie Stevenson are our fullbacks, we'll go on to the other side, left back. Who have you given us? Who are you going to give us?
So I have picked as my left back someone who is also capable of playing at centre half, but I'm putting him at left back because I picked some other people for centre half, and I actually quite liked him there for us, and that is Mick Dunlop.
Right, okay, that's very interesting because I have got Mick Dunlop in this team, but I've got him at centre back. And Mick Dunlop is the teams that he played for during the Irn-Bru era. He played for Queen's Park, Dumbarton, Alloa Athletic, Brecon City and Stranraer, and I think that he would go on to be one of the most successful players to have starred in the 3rd Division League 2. I think 3 league titles and 2 promotions during a pretty starry career, it's fair to say. But why have you put Mick Dunlop in your team?
Those clubs you read out, that's just a list of pure concentrated Irn-Bru-ness of that era. Like, he came to Dumbarton, I think, as one of our bigger name signings in that summer of 2008-9. And to be honest, it started off with injury and he never really got going. But then he became captain the following season when Gordon Lennon passed away. And I think almost every club he went to after that, he captained them. He certainly would have captained them for like a period of time. We spoke about Alan Reid being a consummate professional. That was Mick Dunlop. But actually, Mick Dunlop was a really, really good footballer as well. I think it was helped by the fact he had such a good left foot. So like that was especially in that period, like unusual to have a defender who was that talented with the ball at his feet. I always thought he was a really, really good footballer. And that's probably why he had that kind of longevity in the game, where he just bumped between clubs, between League 2 and League 1. And almost every club he was at, he did a good job. He also looks like a footballer from that time. So like the way he aged, just looked like that. He was a wee bit heavier built in the kind of top half of his body. That was just a great thing. Always wore baggy kits.
Yes.
That was another one. Like, just, he had all the look of a player from that period, and it's going to come down to things like that as I go on through my 11. Like, yeah, he just looked like a guy from that period. But Mick Dunlop was a really good player for Dumbarton. He left after falling out with Jim Chapman, which is a really Irn-Bru era thing to do, fall out with Jim Chapman. Not the only person that's done that, and probably not the only person who's done that will be on this list either. But Mick Dunlop, for me, was one of the first names that I thought of. And I think you speak to any fan of any club he's been at. He's obviously been at Stenhousemuir. If we had an Albion Rovers fan here, a Stranraer fan here, an Alloa fan here, whoever, and just said, talk to us about Mick Dunlop, I suspect they'd only have good things to say about him.
I mean, his time obviously at Albion Rovers, I think Albion Rovers are probably the club that he's most associated with, I would say. I mean, he captained them and he played at centre-back alongside his brother. And that's a great story. Won the league with them, played against Rangers in the Scottish Cup against them when they were diddled out when Billy O'Mosney catapulted into Neil Parry. But I remember him, he was part of the Queen's Park team under Billy Stark, and that's a team I've got a lot of fondness for. But he comes into the Irn-Bru era when they were in the 2nd Division, and they did well to hold their own, and they ended up staying up. Dumbarton, two very successful years at Dumbarton, and did well obviously after the passing of Gordon Lennon to step up and be the captain. At Alloa Athletic, though, very interesting period, because that was Alan Maitland's team that at one point, I think, going into the new year, they were up challenging for promotion and about 4th place. But post-Christmas, they losing, and Stenhousemuir, who were in 9th place, were just able to chip away at their advantage, and they played each other at the Rex, and Mick Dunlop passed the ball back to Jamie Ewings, somebody you'll know as well, and Jamie Ewings picked it up. Indirect free kick, the big easy, Eric Payton scored from it, won that match 2-1, and Stenhousemuir ultimately leapfrogged Alloa. Alloa finished in 9th place when we were relegated, and in that season of 3rd Division, Paul Hartley came in. So there's an interesting wee story. I think, so Mick obviously played his part in that. I think the spells at Brecon City and Stranraer, not particularly noteworthy, but certainly Dumbarton, Alloa and Queen's Park, there was plenty going on there.
That Brecon spell as well was when Jim Weir came into Brecon, and they made a few quite eye-catching signings, and I think everyone that summer fancied them for the league, and then they were rotten, which is again just another kind of team that stuck in my mind from that time. I think we had like Jim Lister, Brian Hodge, guys like that in that team, and I'm sure I remember that summer everybody fancying Brecon to go and do something. They signed Derek Carcray from us, I'm pretty sure that summer, actually. Another Irn-Bru man, but a guy who's not in my team. And it just was rubbish, as far as I remember.
He scored 2 of my all-time favourite Stenny goals. I know it's not Irn-Bru era, but this podcast is all about reminiscent and a bit of nostalgia. The playoff final against Peterhead when we beat them 2-0 at Ochil View. Stenhousemuir had gone the entire season without scoring from a set piece, and Big Mick scored 2 headers in that match. And his celebration for the first one, it's a back post. I think Greg Fleming makes a bit of an arse of it, and there's Dunlop at the back post, just stoops to head it in and celebrates just by running away from everyone, running past the stand with his hand in the air like Alan Shearer. just into his own half with everyone chasing after him. It was brilliant. It was a great moment. So I've got Mick Dunlop in my team. I've put him at centre back cover. The left back that I've gone for Beau Paris at Queen of the South. He was at Queen of the South for I think it was 4 years. He was at Queen's 2007 till 2011. He was at Palmerston. He'd been at Clyde previously, and the reason that I've gone for Beau Paris is because there is something really cool about a left-footed defender who takes free kicks. That is why I've gone for Beau Paris in this. And Beau Paris, one of perhaps the most famous goal he got. I think he got about 9 or 10 goals for Queens. There's a compilation of them on YouTube. It looks like they've been filmed on like the very first ever camera phone as well. So you don't have a clue unless the caption had said this is Beau Paris that scored this. You'd have no idea. But he scored against Nordsjælland in the UEFA Cup. Which is just an incredible achievement, and went on to have a pretty decent career. Ended up playing down for Sheffield United, but it's not much reason. I didn't really see much of Beau Paris, to be honest, when he was playing. However, I have gone for him for this team because the goals that he did score for Queens, he had an absolutely extraordinary left foot. Like I think that of all the guys in this list, and there's another left footer as well who could absolutely melt the ball. I think Beau Paris must have, out of all these players we're discussing, he must have the hardest shot.
When I got your list through, I meant to message Chris McMillan and ask him for his views on Beau Paris' time at Sheffield United, but I did not. So I cannot impart any knowledge about his time at the Blades whatsoever, other than he was there for quite a wee while. So he must have done all right. I go on the basis of if you're like staying at a club of that size for a while, you must have done okay. But I'm totally with you on the left backs in particular that take free kicks or take corners. Oh, something about that.
It's my other favourite thing. Left backs that wear the number 11. I think I really like that as well. That's probably in the minority here. I know there's traditionalists, but I always like my left back wearing number 11. Not entirely sure if Beau Paris did that. I can't imagine he would have done. He was probably just a straight up number 3 when he was at Queen's. But no, I like that. I know hopefully those Queen's fans are looking for a bit more insight into Beau Paris, but that's all you're getting. He could hit a mean free kick, and he was good with set pieces. Well, you've gone for who's your centre back? Who give me your first centre back?
So my first centre-back, and this is continuing my theme of those who are follically challenged, is Pat Scullion.
Pat Scullion? You going for Pat Scullion in your team? Right.
Do you know why?
Sure, you're working.
So first of all, look at the clubs that he's played for. Cowdenbeath, Alloa, Stenhousemuir, Clyde. That's great. Look at the way that Pat Scullion evolved as a footballer from being this kind of like slightly overweight, mercurial central midfielder to being like a centre-back, a right-back, at times a striker.
He played up front for Clyde, didn't he?
Yeah.
Fuck.
So he had this bizarre career where he went from being somebody who I think was a bit of a lazy attacking midfielder, certainly based on everything that I could see from the time. They were like, he's quite good technically, but like he's not that lazy, to just being this jobbing workhorse for Clyde, who then, I think this was after the Irn-Bru era, but he popped up in the Championship with Cowdenbeath.
Unbelievable.
But I picked him on the basis of his moves, the clubs that he's been at, the fact that he joined Clyde, I think it was either on loan from Alloa or on loan from Stenhousemuir. That's a very that sort of time move. I don't get moves like that anymore.
I think we loaned him to Clyde. I think that we'd signed him from Alloa Athletic, and I think there were flashes that you could see him do some really good stuff. He could hit a good free kick as well. There's something, him and Beau Paris squabbling for the ball when we're 25 yards from goal. But he could hit a really good free kick, and he could hit the ball from distance. And there were sometimes you would see him and just think, this guy is actually a bit of a player. But I think far too often he just looked just a wee bit off the pace, and I think he could get caught dawdling sometimes as well. And I think that's the sort of thing that really frustrates supporters. Somebody not really paying attention, and somebody getting the team caught in bother because they're just not aware of what's going on around them. So certainly I can't really speak of Pat Scullion's time at Stenhousemuir particularly fondly, but I have no ill against him all the same.
Have you seen the Clyde fans video, An Ode to Pat Scullion, which was on YouTube about 10 years ago?
I haven't, but I'm hoping we get this wrapped up quite quickly so we can go and watch it.
It's lovely. See some of the goals he scores as well. Absolutely brilliant. They're absolutely brilliant. So
Pat Scullion, God, you have really, there's quite some abstract thinking into this. But I suppose then if Alan Reid is in one team, then why not have Pat Scullion just playing in one? For my other centre-back, I've gone for someone you'll be familiar with, Mark McLaughlin, who was Hamilton Accies and Greenock Morton during the Irn-Bru era, and even had a very brief sojourn in the SPL with the Accies after winning the first division with them. I just think that in this team, you've got Mick Dunlop, who can play a bit. I think you've got Alan Reid, who can just keep it steady. And I think I've got a good balance across the back here. And I think by putting Mark McLaughlin in there, who's just a big, strapping, big, strong, big, no-nonsense defender, someone who's just a pure defender, that's someone I wanted in this team. And someone who has had a bit of success as well, because that was a good Hamilton Accies side that won the first division as well. And I think he might have been their captain. Am I right in saying he was their captain?
Ooh, was Alex Neil their captain?
Oh, he might have been, right. Maybe in the leadership group then, within Hamilton Accies, we'll go with that. That's why I've gone for him.
Brilliant player for Dumbarton as well. And that, again, was, I think, out with the Irn-Bru era. I think so, aye. Off the top of my head, it was the season after that. But he came to us after being at Morton, and Morton fans were basically like, he's finished, he's about 40 years old, he can't move. And he came to us, made his debut against Morton, we kept a clean sheet, and he was absolutely outstanding, and he didn't ever really drop it off from there. So you had him and Andy Graham playing at centre-half together, two guys who couldn't move, who couldn't really run, but the way that they read the game meant that it didn't matter whatsoever. So he was a brilliant player, and he was one of these guys, I think, who knew his limitations. Mm-hmm. Like, I haven't spoke to him, but I feel like if you talk to him, he'll be like, look, I know what I'm good at. I'll win everything in the air. I'll win everything when it comes to challenging people. I know when to kick people, and I know when to not bother challenging them because it's too big a risk. But I'm not going to be, trying to do Cruyff turns in the edge of the box. That's Andy Graham's job. He did that for us a few times. But Mark McLaughlin was a really good player for us. And just that rugged of that time centre half, like I said, knew his limitations, really, really hard. Like, if I could pick a player that I wouldn't want to be up against from that time, he's probably one of the ones from there, because
really aggressive defender.
Like, he would just go and hurt people.
Mm-hmm. But in a channel that. He's not going out to be nasty. He's just that I'm winning the ball and you're not.
Yeah, he would win the ball, put you into the stand, but then kind of offer you a hand and then like high five you and pull you back to your feet, pat you on your back, and then do it again to you 5 minutes later.
Excellent. So then, if we're going to get a consensus then, Fraser, because I think that's important, we'll do the consensus at the end. We'll do the consensus and we'll try and come up with our ultimate team using the constituent parts. We'll say that for the end. Right, we'll go into midfield. And
hang on, I've still it's centre half to go.
Oh, you still got a centre half? I beg your pardon, so you do.
And he's another man who had an unsuccessful time at Stenhousemuir. But I want to talk about McCowdenbeath. It's Joe Irn-Bru.
Joe Irn-Bru. Of course. Yeah, he was great at Cowdenbeath.
So Cowdenbeath and Sons had that rivalry over the kind of Irn-Bru period where they were, I think, 10 or 11 points clear in the third division in March. We won the league in May. Then they won promotion. They had that really good team that won promotion up to the championship. Mm-hmm. Joe Irn-Bru and John Chopper Armstrong.
Oh, man. Brilliant.
Brilliant combination. And I was going to pick one of them, and I didn't really know which one. And then I had to think back to like young Fraser going to games, and I used to see Joe Irn-Bru in the opposition starting lineup and just think, no, this guy bullies us. It doesn't matter who we had up front. He just bullied them. He was a really, really good player for that Cowdenbeath team. I think that Cowdenbeath team, actually, we probably look back on now and really appreciate how good it was. And I reckon Cowden fans, if they're listening to this, well, they'll know how good it is, but they'll be looking back thinking, my goodness, what a squad we had about 10, 15 years ago now. And Joe Irn-Bru was such a big part of that. The two centre-halves that they had at that time were just excellent players, but I picked Joe Irn-Bru because he stood out to me every single time he played us, because we never seemed to get any change out of him at all.
I don't think he was the most mobile of players, but even though you had to, because he was such a big player, if you were going to take it round him, you had to really like go around him to try and get the best of him. Yeah, God, that's a player I haven't thought of for a while. But Joe Irn-Bru was a good player. It was just a shame what happened to him. He came to Steny, and I remember thinking that's a smashing signing. That's a really, really good piece of business. But he just wasn't fit. He just wasn't fit. And you mentioned John Armstrong there. I remember seeing John Armstrong in his final days at Cowdenbeath. John Armstrong had been a superb defender. And you could maybe at one point say that arguably he was the best part-time centre-back in the country. I think he got a really bad injury and came back from it. And I think he was on steroids at the time to help him manage his recovery. And it really bloated him. Like he shouldn't have been playing. I think if we're fair to say, and I think that he might have stopped playing not long after that. I might be wrong. Forgive me if I'm wrong there. But when they were under pomp and when Cowdenbeath, particularly, I think you'd say second division Cowdenbeath, the team that was challenged, the team that won the second division, that was just a smashing team, a really, really good side, and just a team who, when you see where they are now, and I suppose when you see where Cowdenbeath have been previously in their history, that period from like the Mixu Patalainen era, like Danny Lennon, Colin Cameron was a manager then. Just that those decade or so was just a complete anomaly, given how Cowdenbeath's history's been either side of that.
Yeah, and there's when you look at old football league tables and you'll maybe look at a table from 50 years ago and you'll see a team and you'll be like, my goodness, they were like, I don't know, Motherwell were in the 3rd division or East Stirling were in the 1st division or whatever. I feel like that's going to be Cowdenbeath. I think you're going to look at league tables, I don't know, 20 years time, you sit and you go, let's look back at the league table from the 2012-13 championship. Oh my goodness, Cowdenbeath were in there. And like, we're fine. We're perfectly respectable, held their own at that level. Where are they now? And they're maybe by that stage in the East of Scotland League or something. So yeah, a really good team. And Cowdenbeath at that time, again, probably a team that are quite synonymous with the Irn-Bru era because they haven't really done it in any other era. So that was their prime. That was their era.
I think we're going to have to send, in 100 years' time, when historians are looking back over the 2014-2015 Scottish Championship table, they'll need to send like a crack team to investigate exactly why Hearts, Hibs and Rangers were in the division alongside Alloa and Cowdenbeath and Dumbarton. Absolutely the most ludicrous division in the history of football.
The biggest wealth gap of any division ever.
We'll move into midfield then, Fraser. And I suppose, talking about centre-backs, we'll keep on our central midfielders then. We'll start with our central midfielders. Give us your first central midfielder.
My first central midfielder, and this is once again completing my sort of trio of bald players in the middle of the park, is Kevin Nicol. Kevin Nicol being the archetypal midfield hard man. A man who, again, was old before his time. So I watched him play for Stranraer round about, it must have been about 2010 because Ricky Little was playing for Stranraer and Scott Agnew was playing,
Ricky Little didn't play for Stranraer.
No, Queen's Park, sorry. Okay. And Scott Agnew was playing for Stranraer. So it would have been the season before Agnew came to Dumbarton. And I thought Kevin Nicol was quite old. And then he signed for us and turned out that he wasn't. And then as recently as about 2022, he was still playing for Clyde in the league and still picking up yellow cards and getting sent off in his final senior appearance and so on. But Kevin Nicol again is just a really of that time player, a complete hard man. He had a kind of awkward, gangly style on the ball. Never really looked fully in control of it.
Yes.
One of these guys who every single time you saw him play, you thought there was a reasonable chance he was going to get sent off. So aggressive. But you probably talk to fans of every club he's been to, and they all love him. And they all speak so highly of him. And that was certainly the case. He had 2 seasons at Dumbarton, but he didn't play in the second season because of injury. So he had basically 1 season at the club where him and Scott Agnew struck up a brilliant partnership where Nicol would run about kicking people, pulling their shirts, biting their ears, all that kind of stuff, and just give the ball to Agnew and he would play. And it worked so well. And that season, you ask any Dumbarton fan for their memory of Kevin Nicol, or any Arbroath fan actually, and he had a pretty successful spell there. You ask any Dumbarton fan for their memories of Kevin Nicol, and it'll be the way he ragdolled Josh Falkingham in the playoffs. Like, Falkingham had ran us ragged that season. Every single game he'd been the best player on the pitch, and I think Kevin Nicol obviously thought that was enough. And he picked up the ball at one stage, and Falkingham was just hanging off him like a puppy, like just kind of gripping on, and he was like giving it all elbows and just trying to shove him off. And it was one of the most aggressive, this guy's going to get sent off, and I don't even know if he got booked in that game, displays I've ever seen from a midfielder. So Kevin Nicol is in my team to kick people, to half people, to collect yellow cards, to generally infuriate opposition fans, and also maybe be one of those players who's a throwback because, again, I don't feel like there's that many modern day Kevin Nicols.
I'm trying to think who would be the modern day equivalent in the lower leagues of a Kevin Nicol.
Just a complete hatchet man of a midfielder.
Trying to say maybe the only one I can think of it, and I know he doesn't necessarily play midfield, Scott Robertson, maybe at Stranraer. But even then, Scott Robertson's actually quite a decent football player, and certainly nowhere near as aggressive as Kevin Nicol was.
No, I can't think of, because I'm going through all the players I've seen who pick up loads of yellow cards, and you'd say like Andy McCarthy is what Kevin Nicol evolved to be. So Andy McCarthy, I think, is a really good technical footballer. He's also a dirty bastard.
Mhm.
Like, he fouls people. He's good at winning cheap free kicks, sly shirt pulls. He gets booked an awful lot. He's probably what that role of Kevin Nicol evolved into being, where you had to play a wee bit more. You had to be a bit more comfortable on the ball. But yeah, Kevin Nicol, and maybe, I don't know if I'm doing him a disservice just because of his style, quite a limited footballer if you gave him the ball at his feet and asked him to, I don't know, dribble or pass it. But in terms of breaking up play, kicking people, excellent. Nobody was better.
It's interesting what you say about that, how fans who of the teams he played for might remember him fondly. I think that the fans of teams who he played against might not be his kind. When I think of Kevin Nicol, the first thing that comes to my head is hammer thrower. That's the first thing that comes to my head. This big, bald galoot, he looks like someone that Joe and Hen Brown would have a quarrel with. You know, that sort of, you talk about throwback, that's the sort of impression I get from Kevin Nicol. And someone who was aggressive and just patrolled the midfield. That's the whole idea. You can't have a team full of Kevin Nichols, but I think there's room for one Kevin Nicol in your team. Stick him in front of the defence, make his job as easy as possible to do. I'm thinking like Kieran Miller might be the equivalent, but at least Kieran Miller can actually play a wee bit of football. I don't think there was much football in Kevin Nicol, but that does him a disservice because you don't play at the level that he did for long enough unless you can play a wee bit. But that's the whole point of having someone like that is you win the ball, you give it to Scott Agnew, you give it to your ball players, and that's exactly what Kevin Nicol is, a functional midfielder. And I think that you would prefer a Kevin Nicol in your team than to go without one.
Yeah, or to get a sort of empty jersey, one of these guys who's a nice technical player, a nice wee passer of the ball, but never really imposes himself in a game. I tell you who actually Kevin Nicol's modern day equivalent might be to a degree, Blair Malcolm.
Oh, yeah, aye. I suppose, though, because I think when you think of Blair Malcolm, you just think of like when you think of Kevin Nicol, big, tall, bald guy, and then you replace him with kind of a diminutive guy with a ponytail. So they're quite, I'm in my head, like styles, yes. Physical appearance, no. Nothing like each other.
No, polar opposites. But Blair Malcolm kicked a lot of people when he was with us and generally charged about, and then you gave him the ball and he passed it out of play. And that's fine. That's not what he was there to do.
I've gone my first midfielder. I've gone for a midfield 2, I think similar to yourself. And I am going to go for a player who, ability-wise, could have been playing for Scotland, but fitness-wise, would probably struggle to make it in junior football. Somebody who just had such a unique set of attributes, and you really had to find this, but certainly laterally, you really had to work hard to find a place for in your team. Somebody you will know very well, Fraser, Ross Forbes. During the Irn-Bru era, he played for Dumbarton and Partick Thistle. He was also at Motherwell as well for a spell. Obviously, he went on loan from Motherwell to Dumbarton, but certainly very successful in that period because he was part of the Dumbarton team that won the 2008-2009 Third Division, but he also won the First Division with Partick Thistle in 2012-2013. And I think that, for my money, that Thistle side were probably the best footballing team in the lower leagues from the last 15 years. I think this Falkirk side are probably might be better than them. I don't know, but that Thistle team were excellent. And in a player like Forbes, you had someone who just had an incredible left foot, someone who had a phenomenal delivery, but someone who, again, particularly laterally, you'd struggled to get him into your team just because, like, running and chasing after the ball weren't things that he was particularly interested in.
No, he is such an unusual player. I mean, if we're talking about, who's the modern day version of this, who's the modern day version of that, I don't think there's ever going to be another Ross Forbes, because left foot wise, and I honestly believe this, I don't think there were too many players, if any, in Scotland who have a better left foot than he did. Genuinely. If you could take his left foot and then give him the average Premier League players, everything else, like the average Premier League players' stamina, pace, physicality, anything like that, he would have been a regular in the Premier League, probably have a few Scotland caps to his name, and have had a far, far better career. But he couldn't really move.
Yeah.
So you had this guy who was outrageously talented, but who could only really, and certainly towards the end of his second spell with Dumbarton, to be fair, in his first spell he played the same position, but second spell with Dumbarton, you had to play him as a wide midfielder. You had to have a fullback behind him who could bomb up and down all day long, who could defend, who could attack, and who had a huge amount of stamina, and who had to be prepared for the fact he was going to go in the overlap, Forbes was going to cut inside in his left foot and shoot, probably 9 times out of 10. So you had to be really patient with him as well.
Aye, no, what you've described, certainly the Ross Forbes you've described as the Ross Forbes that I knew at Stennismuir, and I remember at the time when we signed him, and then that Wedderburn, I can't actually remember who came first, if it was Wedderburn or Forbes and Wedderburn. I could go back and check. But remember, when we signed, I think it might have been Forbes, you're thinking, okay, that's the sort of player maybe I'm going to need to build the team around. And then we signed that Wedderburn, you're thinking, all right, well, there's two very slow players. And I think certainly in Wedderburn's case, Wedderburn turned into a good player for Stennismuir. I think there might have been too much focus on what he isn't rather than what he is. And that's someone who is, I think, certainly in League One, League Two, like the strongest player, like the most powerful player in the division, who's got a really good left foot, and someone who can patrol the middle of the park very well. I don't think that was the case in Forbes. I think it was, you really think, what are we doing if we're going to try and get him in the team? And you're right, like a 4-3-3, him on the right hand side of it so he could dig the balls out. But he proved to be a really useful player for the Warriors. He scored one of the, I'd say probably my all-time, the best goal I've seen from a Stenny player. I'll say that. The best goal I've seen from a Stenny player in the 3-2 win over Annan Athletic. A last-minute goal where the ball an Annan player headers the ball to him and he takes a touch, and the thing, he's not controlled it properly. The thing's still in the bounds, but he hits it just as it comes up in the bounds, and it goes sailing into the top corner. I think, no, there's no other player on the park, maybe no other player in the division could have done that other than Ross Forbes. Just like a ludicrous player, but there's a reason why he's now playing. Well, certainly after he left Stenny, he went to Clyde. And you're thinking, I remember the interview that I think Brian McLean gave as he first started, we wanted fit players to get around the pitch, and then they signed Ross Forbes. And you're like, oh, I'm not sure about that one. And then he leaves midway through the season and goes to, I think it was at Thornywood or someone like that. So it has been quite a sharp fall. But as you say, I think no question what he could do in the pitch in terms of when he had the ball at his feet, but just when he was out it just maybe like there's sometimes when I think, I know I'm talking for a long time here, but I think that there are some times where you can get away with stuff by just being really good, but the older you get and when it becomes a bit more competitive, you have to offer a wee bit more, and I just don't think Forbes was able to do that beyond what he had. Certainly at the first spell at Dumbarton, we think this guy's going to be a superstar, breaking into that Motherwell team, maybe dropping down with Thistle. We didn't really see. I think that Forbes had more to offer if he wanted to.
My sliding doors moment with Ross Forbes is in the summer of, what would it have been, 2019, when Jim Duffy had came in at Dumbarton. He had Ross Forbes playing just as he was playing at Morton. I think he scored 13 goals for us that season, playing as a kind of wide midfield player. He was our captain, and then he left for Forfar Athletic that summer. He went to Forfar at the same sort of time as Jordan Kirkpatrick went there, and they made a few kind of decent looking signings on paper. It never happened for him. He came back to Dumbarton in the February of 2020. About 6 weeks later, the country went into lockdown. Yeah. And you went from a guy who was in arguably some of the best form of his career. He then had a 6-month wasted spell at Forfar, came back to Dumbarton, was just beginning to get himself back up to fitness, and things dropped off because COVID kicked in. The following season, I think he was probably still our leading assister that season. Only scored 1 goal against Huntly in the Cup, and I don't think there was a great deal of disappointment when he left. And actually, I remember being at the playoffs between Edinburgh City and Dumbarton, being told that both players had signed for Stenhousemuir, and saying to somebody that Wedderburn will be the better signing. And our fans might be like, oh, losing Forbes is a blow, and Stenny fans might be like, oh, we've signed Ross Forbes. But actually, Wedderburn would be the better signing.
And that has proven to be the case. Wedderburn's actually, he's in his 4th season with the club. I think he's turned out to be a really good player. In fact, remember in that playoff final, Forbes was amazing. Am I right in saying that? Yeah. Forbes was really good. And I think there was, certainly amongst our fans, there's a degree of excitement about it. But I remember thinking, like, I've got a mate that's a Dumbarton fan. He says that he's that performance is a bit of an anomaly. You're not going to see that all the time. And well, there you go. You were right. So thank you very much for that.
And I'm Ross Forbes' biggest fan as well. And that season he just wasn't good.
Aye, but that's part of the charm of this Irn-Bru team. It's flawed geniuses, and I think that Ross Forbes might be one of the most flawed in this team. But if Kevin Nicol was one of your midfielders, then who's the other one?
So you've got to pair up your hard man, your guy who's kicking everybody, who's doing the ugly side, who's just generally an unpleasant footballer to watch, not an aesthetically pleasing footballer to watch, with, as far as I'm concerned, and I think you'll agree with me, probably one of the finest talents to ever grace the lower leagues. A man who, in my mind, encapsulates Queen's Park Football Club. A guy who just, all the romanticism of Queen's Park, playing from the juniors, Davy Anderson.
Yes! Snap, that's it. There we go. There's our second snap. Davy Anderson, I think, the best midfielder I've seen since I've been watching the lower league Scottish football. Davy Anderson's the best midfielder, and if he wanted to, I think that was his big problem. If he didn't really want it enough, but he could have played at such a higher level than Queen's Park. Just an exquisite central midfielder.
Yeah, I put in my notes, if Nicola's going around smashing folk, then Anderson is Xavi Hernandez.
I remember watching him the first time going to see him. I remember it was for I think it was like 2011 going to see him, and it was when Queen's Park were playing Clyde at Hampden. And I think the game finished 3-0. Queen's Park scored 2 goals right into the start of the game and a goal at the death. And they're almost playing like a 4-2-4 formation there. Martin McBride, the wingers were pushed so far up and the fullbacks were pushed so high up. But I remember just watching this team and just like, who's that guy? Any time he got on the ball, he looked like he was playing five-a-sides. But he looked like he was playing five-a-sides in bullet time from the Matrix. Like everything around him was going like 0.75 speed, and he was just really capable of he didn't even to do anything like difficult, just like drop a shoulder or just like the hips go one way, then they go the other way. And you've taken someone completely out of the game. And it was all just the passes, just really precise, short passes to just keep the team ticking over, just to be able to take them up the pitch. And just like that, this guy's absolutely phenomenal. And every time I saw him since, I always thought he was the best player in the park. Anytime I watched Queen's Park play, I thought this guy was the best player in the park.
I was just trying to work out what age he was when he came into senior football, because I had in my head that he must have been a wee bit older. So where is it? 2010 that he joined Queen's Park, and he was born in 1983. So what does that make him? 27 when he made his senior football debut. Why did nobody else sign him?
I actually think it was more to do with him than anything else. I remember doing a thing for the Scottish Cup. It was for the 150th anniversary. We did the final event at Queen's Park. We'd taken the cup around the country, and we did the final event at Queen's Park, and we had Liam Craig, Simon Donnelly and Jerry Crawley, who had played for Queen's Park and then went on to become one of the board members. And the conversation, because no disrespect to Queen's Park, you can't really talk much about the Scottish Cup with Queen's Park because they haven't done anything in it for ages. So I was talking about like how Queen's Park have evolved as a club. And I mentioned one of the best players I've ever seen was David Anderson, and Jerry said something. Yeah, but you've got to have that all that quality with ambition, and I just don't think that Anderson could really be bothered, or maybe there was just stuff going on personally that meant it was just convenient for him to play for Kilburney, and just maybe something happened. He got the chance to play for Queen's Park for a couple of years. Whatever it was, but I just felt as though that Anderson, had he been a bit more like on it, he could have played at a higher level. And that's part of the charm. That's part of the charm for this. You've got just such a supremely gifted football player, somebody who can run midfields, someone who very rarely gives the ball away, that just wasn't all that fussed.
It's one of these nice ones where you've got a player who doesn't appreciate how good he is. So how many players have we seen who act like they are as good as Davy Anderson and they're not? And then you've got somebody there who just comes across really humble, really unassuming, really like, just turn up on a Saturday, do my job for Queen's Park. And I can't think of anyone who is as good as he is, but has had outwardly such a mediocre career.
Yeah.
Like, if you said to somebody, the best player I've seen in the lower leagues one of the best players is Davy Anderson, and they go home and Google him, they'll see a guy who spent 4 or 5 seasons at Queen's Park, bobbing between League 2 and League 1, and then went back to playing in the juniors.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't get it. Like they wouldn't understand it, which again adds to the magic of it. And for me, the fact he was at Queen's Park is what makes it.
Yeah.
So see if he went to Steny, or if he went to Dumbarton, or he went to Clyde or wherever, it wouldn't be quite as romantic. But it's the fact you've got this guy playing for Queen's Park, like a team that we both have, I think, like a sort of great degree of, or certainly with the old Queen's Park, if you will, before they went full time, like a degree of love for. Like I've got Queen's Park tops from when I was growing up because there was just something kind of magical about Queen's Park, the Irn-Bru kit, going to Hampden to watch games. And then you've got this guy in midfield who almost encapsulates, I suppose, what that era of Queen's Park was about. Mm-hmm. Like there was a guy who could have been paid to play, but didn't. Like he just played because he loved it and was really good at it.
The man who embodies the ethos, the luder cosa ludendi. And on top of that as well, Fraser, like some of the guys that he had around them who went on to maybe not so much Irn-Bru Men, but certainly into the who followed up the sponsor, the Clyde. That wasn't Clydesdale Bank. Who was the sponsor after?
It was unsponsored. It just became the SPFL, didn't it? The first seasons of that, I'm sure.
But then, like probably the most famous player that he played alongside, Andy Robertson, goes on to. Well, we don't need to really. Everyone knows what Andy Robertson went on to do. Then Lawrence Shankland as well. He played in the same team as Shankland, but then he played alongside some like other SPFL like stalwarts, like Neil Parry played alongside him, Ricky Little, Jamie Longworth, all guys who are like fondly remembered at other clubs. And so that he's. And then his final season with Queen's Park, they finished bottom of League 2 when the team were playing at Airdrie, where all those good players had moved on, and Gardner Spears was trying to piece together a team with odds and sods, and it just didn't work. And unfortunately, that was Anderson. I think it was quite an injury disrupted season as well. That was Anderson's final season at Queen's Park before he went back to Kilbirnie. But nevertheless, like those first 3 seasons were really good. That was a really good group of players that he had around him. Particularly, I think that the 12-13 season with a lot of those guys, that was a right good time. But yeah, I think that he is. Like, he's one of my favourite lower league football players of all time, and just a really smashing talent that had he been bothered, he could have played at a higher level. So there you go. There's one player. I'm glad we can agree on that. Right, we'll move on to our wingers then. We'll start with your right wing. Who have you gone for your right wing?
So this is one that a guy I wanted to squeeze in, but I couldn't put him up front, so he's on the wing, and that is Andy Rodgers. Andy Rodgers is going to make is going to make my team hateable. Now, actually, that's a bit of a trait that I've gone for across the midfield. So you've got Kevin Nicol in this team, and you've got Andy Rodgers in this team. A man who, when he was at Dumbarton, was very, very good. We spoke about the fact that fans wouldn't have had like a bad word to say about guys like Mick Dunlop, Jamie Stevenson. Dumbarton fans don't have very much good to say about Andy Rodgers, despite the fact he was on the pitch a very decent player for us, because they didn't like the way he conducted himself on the pitch or off the pitch. And right throughout his career, I think that's kind of been the story. Like a good player, a very good player on his day, an exceptional player, certainly at League 1 level on his day. A guy who was a really good servant to Peterhead over the years, who had a cracking spell at Stenhousemuir. But it's somebody that was really, really difficult to like.
Not going to dispute any of that, Fraser. Not going to dispute any of that. Like, to talk to Andy, like, cause I've done it a couple of times. He's quite a quiet guy, but I just think then the other side of him, when he's on the pitch, he just moans and moans and moans and just loves bamming up the opposition. Loves just being a wee fanny in that regard. However, what he was, there's another player who was just. I think that we see the best of him at Stenhousemuir. He was really good for Stenhousemuir. And this is post. This is just no. Was it Irn-Bru era? I think it might have been Irn-Bru era.
Yeah, I think it was.
Yeah, it would have been. It would have been. The Davy Irons team struck up a really good partnership up front with Stuart Keane, and he scored some ludicrous goals. He scored the best goal that he scored for Stenhousemuir. It was a 4-4 draw with Albion Rovers at Clifton Hill. He got a ball played over to him. Stenny were in the attack, and I think it was like a 3-on-2. He got the ball played over to him from Darren Smith. It was a cross, like knee-high crossed edge area. he jumped up and scissor kicked it with the outside of his foot and sent it like the way he connected with it was just extraordinary. I was standing in line with it and just seeing the ball bend into the net. That was the sort of stuff that he could do. But I just think that like lifestyle, I think that he enjoyed going for a pint on a Sunday. I think that was the thing. Like Sundays was his day where he could go and have a pint. And I don't think that he perhaps had the temperament or the to be a full-time football player. However, he certainly had the talent, because there was times he could do stuff with the ball. You're just thinking, you're just such a good player. Like a lot of these guys in this list, you're such a good player. But that was just I just didn't have the temperament to make it as a full-time.
He was somebody that I felt I had to get in. His disciplinary record is hilarious. I mean, I think he's been sent off twice from not even playing, just being on the bench during his time at Peterhead. It's just really, really funny stuff. But also, like you say, such a good player, capable of moments of magic, divisive, hated by opposition fans. I like all that in terms of what I'm looking for from this team. And then again, you look at the clubs that he was at. So Dumbarton, Montrose, East Stirling, Ayr, Stenhousemuir, Peterhead. Like, brilliant. That's exactly the clubs that you should be at to be in this team. And also, we'd touched on it earlier, but that really good Shire team, like he was in that as well. Yeah,
I can completely see why you'd want Andy Rogers included. On top of that as well, he was part of the Peterhead side that was that was the Battle of East End Park. They had a really interesting rivalry going with Dunfermline. I think he was part of the team that just took turns in kicking Josh Falkingham. Then he got 2 players sent off that day.
Just for kicking Josh Falkingham.
Josh Falkingham.
Imagine in this scenario that Josh Falkingham ends up playing against this team that I've assembled, and he just is stood in the tunnel and he sees Andy Rogers and he sees Kevin Nicholl stood behind him and he's just like, oh Jesus, what have I signed up for?
Brilliant. No, he's prime. He's prime for this. But if that's your right winger, I think I've got someone that can maybe trump him. And I know this guy might have played more on the left-hand side, but he could also play in the right. Stevie Murray played for during this period, Partick Thistle, Dumbarton and Stenhousemuir. Perhaps the most entertaining player in this team, just in terms of just a pure footballer who just wanted to be on the ball and wanted to take the piss out of people, wanted to dump defenders on their arse and chip in across. But this was married to someone who, that skill was married to someone who was just inconsistent, had a real tendency of dropping out of games, a real tendency of doing a lot with the ball but not doing very much with the ball at all. And the fact that he was just he's about 5'5" and just quite tubby as well. I thought he was a really entertaining, but didn't necessarily have the final product to go alongside it a lot of the time. But someone who I think is very fondly remembered by, I'd say, every club that he played for, like Kilmarnock. Remember, my granddad, Kilmarnock fan, used to talk about him, loved him as a player at Kilmarnock. Thistle, Dumbarton, you'll probably feel the same, Fraser, about him. And at Steny, he was well liked by the Warriors as well.
I was trying to see if I could find it. So Stevie Murray played in a game against our fans about 2 seasons ago, I think it was now. My brother was in goals and he pinged a pass out to Stevie Murray on the right wing, it would have been. And he trapped it in his arse right in the touchline, waited on the player coming through towards him, then stuck it through his legs and just charged off down the wing. Just brilliant. And so much fun. Stevie Murray was probably the closest thing that Scottish football had to someone like Ronaldinho. Someone who was basically
played football with a smile on his face.
Yes, just out there to have a laugh. Just you know what, I'm outrageously talented. I'm going to do this. And the end of the game, he finished with, I think he finished his time at Dumbarton with 4 goals and 10 assists or something in 2 seasons. That's rubbish for a guy who's as good as he was. But every single Suns fan, and it'll be the same at Steny because his stats will be broadly similar, every single Steny fan will speak fondly of him because he was so much fun. I think he was the first player I ever saw doing an outrageous number of stepovers in the Scottish 3rd Division. So that was round about the time that Cristiano Ronaldo had made the stepovers and that kind of style of play popular. And I'm convinced Stevie Murray did it almost as a piss take. He'd do a couple of stepovers and then he'd just face up some jobbing, right back at Montrose and then do 10 stepovers.
Aye.
And then just hoof across out of play.
Aye. That I think that was the big frustration with him, because it's great when he's on the ball and he can roll the ball over and he can create space for himself, but it was just decision making and final product were something that's what ultimately why he's down at this level, and the lack of fitness as well. And there were times where he could do mean, that's the whole point of wingers, though, isn't it? All you need to do is one amazing thing over the course of the game, and you get your name in the paper. You're the hero, and it didn't quite happen often enough. Despite how much fun he could be, all that other stuff just didn't quite happen enough. However, I loved him. Really, really liked watching him, and I think he was certainly. I'm trying to get Stenny. Have we ever had his? Nah, I don't think we've had as entertaining a player since. There's more clinical players, more effective players. I'm trying to think the closest that we've probably had to is like Ewan O'Reilly, for instance, in terms of a winger, someone who can get on the ball and excite the crowd. But Ewan O'Reilly's far more destructive and more consistent than him. But who would rather watch every week? Probably Stevie Murray, if I'm being honest. And that's no disrespect to Ewan O'Reilly. It's just Murray has, anyone who will have watched him will probably agree. Just like you can have loads of fun watching him.
I've sent you a video now that you'll be able to see when we finish this podcast, but just to talk people through it, and it is available on Dumbarton's Twitter, and I'll try and send it on to Fowler and it can get sent out. But basically, Max kicks the ball, it's my brother, kicks the ball at Stevie Murray, controls it on his arse, rolls it through his legs, does 2 roulettes to face up a guy, then does like a press up on the ball, and then just plays a simple pass out wide. That's Stevie Murray. That's him, summed up.
Brilliant.
Great.
What about your left-hand side, Fraser? Who's the winger there?
So, Kevin Nicol will get a fair amount of ire from the crowd. Andy Rogers will get a fair amount of ire from the crowd. If there's any crowd left, Bobby Barr will take the rest of the heat.
Yes. Oh, you've made such an unlikable team. David Anderson there, just like struggling to try and get people back on side. Bobby Barr probably played. Yeah, he'd have been an Irn-Bru boy. I think Livingston would have been his best football during this period.
Third Division Player of the Year at Albion Rovers as well in 2008-09.
Right, was that no? Because he'd gone on loan at that'd been prior to that, wasn't it? He'd gone on loan at the Rovers and then fell out and then signed for them permanently and fell out with Paul Martin.
Yeah. And then at Livingston and Brechin and a few other clubs, I think.
Aye. I've met Bobby Barr. I think one of my all-time favourite Pelly podcasts I did was with Bobby Barr, particularly talking about his time at Raith Rovers. But no, I think at Albion Rovers, very, very good player. But Livingston especially, I think that was the Livingston side. Obviously, at that level, it dropped down to that level because of financial problems, like persistent financial problems. I think we're just say like, no more. You're getting relegated for your cheek. But aye, Bobby Barr could be like really a really strong, good dribbler with the ball, good for about like 6 or 7 goals, and just good for like getting crosses. And aye, Bobby Barr was a right good player. I
really liked him when he played for us as well, and he was just a really good 7 out of 10 most weeks winger. He would do his defensive duties, he'd cover his fullback, he'd ping in quite a lot of crosses all game. Varying quality, but fairly decent. And like you say, almost every club he was at, you could count them to get 5, 6, 7 goals a season. I think he might have hit double figures a couple of times, but he was a very, very good player in that Albion Rovers team, and something quite different to what they had, because especially in 2008-09, it's rich coming from me who was described as a cheese string at the start of this, but like, he was a scrawny wee boy at Albion Rovers, and that team full of guys who were slightly larger, seasoned pros, and he stood out. Not just because he was being drowned in a Pro Star kit, but because you thought, this guy, like the rest of them, tough team to play against, not brilliant footballers. This guy actually looks like a really good footballer. And you look at the teams he was at right throughout his time during the Irn-Bru era between Albion Rovers, Brechin and Livingston, I think, all during that time. Really good player for all of them. Like really effective, hard-working, somebody who probably did maximise his ability. Like, I don't think Bobby Barr ever would have been a regular Premiership player. I don't see that. But being like his time at Raith Rovers, for example, his time at Morton, time at Livingston, being a kind of decent, good mid-table Championship player probably is about the right place for Bobby Barr over the course of his career. And then there's the fact he's a complete wind-up merchant, and that's an aspect that I loved when he played for us, because he just, particularly our Broth fans and Brechin fans, he used to love giving a wee bit back to them, and that was always just really good fun.
I remember him saying in that podcast that I recorded with him, if I came into your work and was screaming abuse at you, how do you think you'd feel? And I was like, I don't think I'd like it very much. I think it's the sort of idea that, yeah, it's a funny thing with football supporters. You think you can shout whatever you want at people, and then as soon as they bite back, you're like shouting at the lines. And I think that's something that I quite liked about Bar. He probably, all that abuse, the pelters that he got, I don't think he would have taken it personally. I think he just like, that's just part of the game. Like, you can shout at me, but I can shout at you back. And he certainly, he certainly did. I think that's right. When he was at his peak, that was a pretty decent Livingston team that got into mid-table, and obviously there's issue with John Hughes, went out on loan to East Fife, and then bobbed around a wee bit there. But a good player, especially in his day. He probably, I think on his day, out of all the players that we've spoken about so far, certainly the more attacking players, I think on his day, Bar's probably the best that we've touched on, maybe.
Yeah, I think he's
most consistent.
Well, Ross Forbes, yeah, but most consistent and most adaptable. Like, you didn't have to build a team around Bobby Barr. You signed him, you put him in the team to be a left winger, and he was a left winger. Full stop. End of story. That was it. It was dead simple.
And he was part of that Brechin side as well. I remember, again, going back to the Pelly podcast, but doing one with Alan Troughton, and he was talking about the Brechin team that he played in. And basically, this was Ray McKinnon's team. It was basically like almost a 6 and a 4. You had your back four, 2 holding midfielders, and Gary Fusco and Craig Malloy. And then your forwards was Troughton, Andy Jackson, Bobby Barr and Derek Clarke. And I remember him saying, probably a bit more to it than that, but I'm saying that Ray McKinnon just said, you four can play what you want, do what you want, but as soon as you lose the ball, you get back into shape. And I think that's probably because they were quite an entertaining side to watch. And I suppose if you've got Clarke and Bobby Barr and Alan Troughton and Andy Jackson, guys who just want to be in the ball and want to make things happen, that there was a lot of good stuff that would have happened there.
I remember him getting absolutely stinking abuse up at Brechin when he played for us, and turning around and giving a guy like a complete mouthful back, and the guy, I don't know, he just looked completely shocked. And I'm like, you've seen this guy play a fair amount of games for your club. Why do you think that he's not going to bite back?
For my left wing, I've gone for Bobby, but it's Bobby Lynn that I've gone for here. Now, Bobby Lynn is perhaps best known for his time at Irn-Bru. I think he was there for 10 years, and I think during that period was probably the best part-time player, arguably one of the best part-time players in Scotland that period, especially during the rise. Bobby Lynn became quite popular player during that period because it was the rise of BBC Scotland showing Championship football. Good story with him being a binman as well. I think that there was some hilarity to be had with that, especially when he tried to claim disability benefit despite the fact that he was in the SPFL Team of the Week that week after having a really good performance for Irn-Bru. But I think that I'm going to go back further. I'm going back to his time it's really at East Fife, where I think Bobby Lynn really made his name at this level. He played for Greenock Morton, and I don't think that was an especially successful period for him. Seemed like somebody who liked just to be at home, being in Dundee. And I think that playing for East Fife would have given him the opportunity to do that. And certainly just a really good player. And similar to what we're saying about Bobby Barr, just in terms of, he developed, he became more consistent as the season as he went on, and particularly I think it was the season where Irn-Bru might have won the League 2 title, where he was exceptional. I think he might have got 15, 20 goals that season, something ridiculous like that. But certainly it was during his time at East Fife where he really began to stick out. This guy who was just really, really fast, low centre of gravity, someone that wanted to just get the ball to the byline and get it chucked in. And then somebody who could also chip in with a good number of goals along the way. And I think that Lynn might have been better in the SPFL era, but I do think that him establishing himself as during the Irn-Bru era, I really liked him.
See, if you actually ignored his Irn-Bru time, you just discount that altogether, and you only go off his time at East Fife, I think we would still have picked him for this team because of how good he was. And you would have said, oh, he's one of these guys who should have played at a higher level. We should have seen more of him, blah, 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 blah. And actually, he was almost a bit of a late bloomer in terms of he played the best of his football. Probably, yeah, like you say, 2018-19 was probably his best season. I think he won Player of the Year in League One. Irn-Bru won the title, and he was absolutely exceptional. I remember him scoring a goal against us at the Rock for East Fife, where it's like a ball is floated over from the right wing, and he just waits in it, whoever was playing at right back for us comes in, and then he does like a wee kind of shoulder flick, like controls it just round about his kind of chest.
Amazing.
Shoulder flick round to the side, gets onto his left foot, drills it across the keeper and into the bottom corner. And it was one of those ones that it's over so quickly.
Yeah.
It's like the ball's hanging, all of a sudden, 2 movements, and he's sticking it in the bottom corner. And that's when I first noticed him and thought, this guy looks really good. What's he doing playing for East Fife? And then he ended up at, was it Ballingry Rovers when they started throwing silly money at it?
Yeah, just there for a season. I think it was Willie Gray who'd been previously involved with Wraith Rovers and East Fife, I think, was chucking money into it. Ballingry Rovers no longer exist. So that just goes to show you how well that project went. And Lynn had bled them dry, took them for all they're worth, and then pitched up in Irn-Bru. But you're right, late bloomer. Played his best football in his 30s, and it's unusual, especially for a winger, to do that, because you think of people who are playing their best football in their 30s, you think of centre-backs, goalkeepers, maybe deep-lying midfielders, your Kevin Nichols of this world playing their best football at that point. You don't think of wingers. But I remember watching a video, I think it might have been when they got promoted to the Championship, but it was a video of Bobby Lynn's fitness regime. I don't know if you ever saw it. He was doing boxing training with one of his mates, and he was running up hills just outside Dundee.
I wonder if it was just that's when he screwed the head and he thought, actually, hang on a minute here. I'm really good at football. Like, I'm really good, and I don't want to be retiring. You know, when it maybe hits a wee bit later and you think, I don't want to be retiring with any regrets. And I don't think he will now. That's the thing. You'll be like, you know, he's an Irn-Bru icon. He took his team to the brink of the Premiership, or he was involved when they got to the brink of the Premiership. He maximised it there, and I don't think he'll retire with any regrets, but I wonder if it just clicked that wee bit late where he thought, I need to make sure that I'm getting myself into shape, because he was at times, or he certainly looked at times a wee bit heavy.
I think that might have just been his body shape, because when you see him, what the work that he's putting in that video, certainly he was absolutely grafting. I think there was one point when he was talking about wanting to get back into full-time football, and that's a pretty big talk given the fact that he'd been out of full-time football for so long. You don't see someone suddenly become like a full-time footballer, or certainly very rarely. Michael McKenna is probably the only example at the moment, and you see that his move to Falkirk hasn't really worked out for anyone. But certainly, maybe at the time, McKenna's didn't really make much sense. But at that time with Lynn, you could have said, if a team fancies taking him on at full time, well, he's certainly proven himself, and he's certainly doing it on the pitch for Irn-Bru. But just a great player. But really, maybe Irn-Bru, is he a proper Irn-Bru man? I'm going to go say yes, because he was fantastic at East Fife, and he's one of those guys as well who joined a team, a provincial village team that was chucking money at it, and it didn't work out. So yes, there we go. Now we've got 2 positions left, or 2 centre forwards. I'm wondering if we've picked the same 2 players. It'll be interesting to see this. But Fraser, give me your first centre forward, please.
So I haven't, because I thought a wee bit of variety might be fun.
Okay.
And my first one is somebody again who's going to come into that, I guess, that Pat Scullion category. But oh yeah, Darren Gribben.
Fuck off. Right, okay. Man who played for, I think, Irn-Bru, Berwick Rangers.
Forfar. Sterling Albion.
Right, okay.
Brechin.
I'll be honest, man. Darren Gribben is a name that I haven't thought of for years. Similar to like Stephen Grinley and Pat Scullion. Right. Again, please, Fraser, show us you're working.
So in that 3rd division season of 2008-9, which I will talk about a lot, as everyone who's ever listened to me on this podcast knows, Darren Gribben finished the season as one of the top scorers in the league. That was up there with Brian Graham. Now, Darren Gribben was playing for Berwick. Berwick were rubbish that season. So Dumbarton naturally signed him. And then he left after a month under a cloud with the vicious rumours about things potentially going missing from the dressing room.
Oh, no.
So I don't know if that's true, right? That was what the rumour was at the time. I've never seen anything to substantiate it. We signed the guy who was one of the top scorers in the 3rd division, and Dumbarton needed a striker because our top scorer was Ross Clarke, who was a central defensive midfielder predominantly in his career, or certainly more of a central midfield player. And I thought, right, this guy looks like he'll be a cracking signing. Watched him play once and thought, oh my goodness, this guy's awful. He looks like Kevin Nicholl playing up front. Not that I knew who Kevin Nicholl was. Then he almost broke Mido's leg in a friendly. It's like a ridiculous over-the-ball lunging tackle when we played Middlesbrough, and then he vanished. And then, just to sort of bring it full circle, he popped up at club. He popped up back at Berwick, has a really decent goal run there. He ended up at Arbroath and Stranraer as well during the Irn-Bru era. A really odd player, because in the 4 friendlies or so that he played for us, I didn't see any signs of somebody who could score goals. But when you look at his stats, they're not bad. Like, for the teams he was at, they're fairly reasonable of someone from that time, but a really ugly player to watch. And somebody who I'm just confused and slightly fascinated by.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not fascinated by him, but I'm confused by him of all the players that you could have gone for, Darren Grimm, because just when you were talking there, I brought up his Wikipedia page, and it really seems to be that, his time still in Albion, Dumbarton there, 0 appearances, 0 goals, Boness United, Berwick. His time at Berwick was good, almost a goal every other game during the second spell with them. It's probably the first time I'm going to have to intervene and say we can't be putting Darren Grimm in an Irn-Bru Men team.
But Berwick Rangers are quite an Irn-Bru team, yes. I would say. And Darren Grimm was the Berwick Rangers talisman. I mean, you look at it, 77 starts, 41 goals for Berwick Rangers.
Okay, well, when you put it like that makes sense. I'll give you my first of my 2 strikers. Similar to David McGurn, I just went for the very best. And I think I went for someone who, I think if David Anderson is like my favourite like lower league player, or one of my favourite lower league central midfielders, I can go for someone who you can maybe say objectively is the best lower league player of all time. Rory McAllister, from his time at Brecon City and sort of Peterhead, and his spell at Peterhead bled into the SPFL era. But my goodness, remember seeing this guy at Brecon, and just when you see the size of him, what he could do with the ball, how his teammates perceived him, he could do everything. He was the player you were most scared of coming up and facing because you knew he was going to score. He's got a phenomenal record against Steny, especially when he was at Peterhead, but someone you thought, it's almost putting Rory McAllister in your team is almost like giving your team a head start. And we were doing another Pelly podcast with Scott McLaughlin, talking about playing with Rory McAllister at Peterhead, and their tactic was basically get the ball to Rory. Get the ball to Rory, because if you give it to him, he can make a chance for himself. And if he's not making a chance for himself, he's holding on to the ball and the entire team can push up and give him a hand to get it. That's the kind of player that he is. His goal return at Brecon, frightening. Goal return at Peterhead, even better. And if there's only one frustration about him, it is that when he left Brecon in 2011, he didn't move into full-time football. Instead, he dropped down a division, in fact, to play for Peterhead. I mean, it disappointed me at the time, but looking back now, it's like, who gives a fuck? You know, he's like the guy's entitled to maximise his career. He obviously lives in Aberdeen. He wants to be playing football that's convenient for him. If you've got a young family and you've got a child outside the game and you enjoy doing it, that's all fine. And just since then, he's like, for that period, he's obviously advanced in years now, but for that period in his 20s into his 30s, he was the best. And I think you'll be very, very hard pushed to find a striker who will score as many goals as him in the next decade or so.
I don't know if we'll potentially ever see another player doing that, to be quite honest, because you think with the money that's been swelling about at the moment, if somebody was doing that and they didn't have the desire to move up, unless they are from a sort of geographically more isolated area, then say somebody does that for anyone across the Central Belt and they're like, I don't really want to play at a higher level, and East Kilbride come in and offer you $2,500 a week, you're going to go there. Obviously you're going to go there. So I don't know if we'll ever see somebody getting the amount of goals that he got across League 2 and League 1. And like you say, he was the complete striker. Like, he can do everything. Mm-hmm. So he has scored more goals than anyone else, I think, in the SPFL era. I think that's still the case. I can't think of anyone who
sounds about right.
Him. I can't think of anyone who would have overtaken him. So he's got more goals than anybody. He's probably also one of the best back-to-goal strikers in the league, one of the best target men in the league. Like, it shouldn't be possible to do all those things and have spent your career in League 1 and League 2 and Brecon and Peterhead. And for that brief spell at Cove, when I actually thought he might be done here, and then he had just that wee kind of Indian summer spell at Cove, like they are really, really lucky, because the amount of times that I have looked at him playing against us and thought I would literally murder somebody to have him up front for us for a season.
Aye, he's a great player. You're right, complete striker. I suppose the closest thing we're going to get to Didier Drogba type player, and just clinical as well, and just ruthless, and he didn't need much. Like he could good at head, good in the air, good along the deck, skillful as well. This would have been Irn-Bru era, but do you remember the goal he scored against Rangers on the opening day of the 12-13 season?
Yes.
He gets the ball played over to him, and it's Emilson Kribari. He fakes to, Kribari fucking buys it a badging, but he goes to fake shoot, dumps Kribari in his arse and opens up his body and curls it into the top corner with his left foot. Just a superb goal. And to just have the composure and the wherewithal to pull off something like that in a game like that, that's really impressive.
He was a big game player as well. Like, he always seemed to like those sort of games. Do you remember at Falkirk away for Peterhead, and he scored, I think, 5?
Yeah, that was in the SPFL Trust or the Challenge Cup at the time, was it? The Petrofat Cup, something like that.
But if you score, like, if you've got a player who's capable of doing that, you just think you could have, like, what could you have gone on to be?
Yeah.
And like you say, I don't think he has any regrets. And to be honest, I don't have any regrets for him in terms of I love looking at his stats. Sometimes I'll just go and look at players' soccer-based pages and just be like, look at that. Like, look at the amount of goals he's scored.
Well, you won't look down his page, the ones, twos. Yeah. You sometimes the odd 3 in there, but it's just sometimes some players just like there's the one is dotted, but his it's just with those seasons at Brecon and Peterhead, dum. Aye, it's brilliant,
just phenomenal.
I remember seeing him. I think I'd gone into bat for him on an episode of A View to the Terrace about something. Someone if he'd been fit, if he was finished or not, and I said, no, this guy is still the best. I mean, age catches up with everyone. And it's maybe catching up with him a little bit, but he's still the best of all time. And I was seen him, I was at Hospitality for Steny versus Peterhead back in March. He was on the bench that day, and I was in Hospitality, but I wanted to go and sit in my normal seat, because that's where I sit when I'm at Oakville View. And he was coming off the pitch, and I said, all right, man, and sort of gave him a hug when I was coming off the pitch. So that was a really nice moment. But no, he is, I think he's objectively the best. Now, our final striker, and I'm wondering if this time we've gone for the same player, because if we have, then I think this might be the quintessential Irn-Bru man that we have in this team, and I hope we're going for the same player with this one, Fraser.
We haven't, and if he's listening to this podcast, he'll slide into my DMs and call me a knob.
Who have you gone for?
I've gone for Jamie Longworth.
Right, I'd gone for John Gemmell, right? So I was just trying to set up. I thought you'd gone for Big Match John, but no. Jamie Longworth is a very, very sensible pick, because I think it was definitely in the Irn-Bru era with Queen's Park and with Stranraer where he was an outstanding centre forward. Yes.
Also, I needed my symmetry, so I've got Stephen Grunley, I've got Pat Scully, and I've got Kevin Nicol, and I've got Jamie Longworth. So I have the bald players.
Baldman.
Yes, so that was important to me to have that right throughout the team. See, the first thing that shocked me about Jamie Longworth, he's only 37 now.
That's a tough paper round. He looked like even when in his early 20s, he was 37.
Yeah, I thought he was going to be about 44 or so when I went onto his transfer market page. But no, he's only 37 now. He's playing out in Dubai, or certainly was last time Transfermarkt was updated, with the same team as Ryan McGeever. I think it's like Dubai Irish or something like this. But him and Ryan McGeever are both PE teachers, so they both played or are playing for some team out in the UAE. But yeah, I picked Jamie Longworth. I guess Stranraer and Queen's Park, 2 good Irn-Bru teams. I think if you're going to pick an Irn-Bru player, then he needs to be wearing the Irn-Bru kit, and that therefore puts Queen's Park in. I like the fact that he came up from the juniors. Yes. He then made that name for himself at Queen's Park. He was then part of a really successful Stranraer team, and just a really, really good goal scorer. He was somebody who I always wanted Dumbarton to take a punt on, and then it maybe just became as Dumbarton progressed, his career started to go down a wee bit, and I thought, this isn't going to happen. But there was a spell where I thought, this guy would be phenomenal for us.
Yeah. I mean, his career did take quite a stark downturn, because I think after Stranraer, he went to Alloa, wasn't particularly successful there. He had a season at Stennismuir. Remember, we signed him and Mark McGuigan, and you're thinking, my goodness, that's going to be an absolute amazing strike force. And it was just a shame Longworth didn't contribute to it really at all. And then after that, I think it's Steny. I'm seeing like East Kilbride, St Rochs, and so on. Like East Kilbride Thistle, which is fairly low down, and now he's coaching out in Dubai and playing for this made up football team. But certainly at Queen's Park, and I think especially at Stranraer, and it might be a wee bit of an overlap into the SPFL era. It would have been, because it would have been the Stranraer team that from 13-14, because he scored in a 1-1 draw with Rangers at Ibrox. They were the first team to take points off Rangers that season. And just that, Stranraer had a right good team. In fact, he was part of it. In fact, the Queen's Park team he was part of was really good. The Stranraer team he was part of was really good. It's probably the best Stranraer I've been since... I think he was part of like Stranraer's best team since like probably the Neil Watt, Campbell Money era.
Yeah. And there was a season where he got 20 goals, I think, for Queen's Park. That's brilliant. For any player to be getting 20 goals for Queen's Park, especially in their amateur days, is unbelievable. They called him
the Clyde killer as well, because he loved a goal against Clyde. Actually, that game that I was talking about earlier, I think he actually scored twice. The 2 goals right at the start, I think he scored them both. I need to go and check. But no, Jamie Longworth's a really good shout. And I wish I'd had a look at this before, because I set up so we could just eulogise Big Match John at the end there, but you left me hanging. But no, that's Jamie Longworth is a very, very good pick. I have gone for, it won't surprise you to learn, that I have gone for my second striker, John Gemmell. Albion Rovers, Cowdenbeath, Montrose, Albion Rovers again, and Stennismuir. And just someone who, like a lot of these guys, had the natural talent and the natural build as well. There's the other thing. Big, tall, strong, quite quick off the mark as well. You know, he wasn't slow. He had all the attributes to actually become a good, full-time, top-flight football player. He just couldn't be bothered, and was a wee bit of an arse about it as well. He'd probably admit that himself about his younger days, where he just thought he could get by on being good, and it's only till he got older and he had the opportunity to go back to Dumbarton that he realised the importance of looking after yourself and eating right and training well. It's just a shame that he didn't appreciate that when he was like 17 and 18. My goodness, when he was good, he was excellent. He was really good. Some of the stuff that he could do, some of the chances he could create for himself, games where you could tell early doors what way it was going to go for John. And when it was going to go for him good, when he could win those first couple of balls against defenders, he looked absolutely phenomenal. Game against Dumbarton, against Brechin City, was Jerry McLaughlin was marking him, and just he smelled blood. I think he got 2 goals, including like this daisy cutter free kick that he scored against it. But and on top of that as well, we mentioned the good stuff, all the daft stuff that he did during that period for those clubs as well. Just a real flawed genius.
I remember, I think we both actually had John Gemmell on our podcasts within about a day of each other when he signed for Dumbarton. And he told the story about when he was at Montrose, didn't like Stephen Tweed at all, and he was meant to be training with a team in Glasgow once a week, and then with Montrose once a week. And he would just tell the gaffer, yeah, I'm training with Pollock, I'm training with, I don't know, like Shettleston, whatever team came into his mind, or a team where he maybe knew somebody. And he'd just sit at home, order a pizza and watch the Champions League. That's
what we were asking, that we did that. So what do you do then? No, I just watch the Champions League and eat Domino's. Yeah. Great. I mean, it's funny to hear that, but if that was your club, you'd be absolutely furious. If you're a Montrose fan, you're getting paid a lot of money at the time. And that's how you're treating it. It was also his time at Cowdenbeath. That was a Cowdenbeath team. They lost in the playoffs to Steny, but went up anyway because of Livingston's financial difficulties. That ties in with Bobby Barr. But he was quite a useful player, for fact, actually pretty good player for Cowdenbeath. He got sacked from Cowdenbeath for getting gassed and singing a song about Danny Lennon during a pre-season camp in St Andrews.
Which is a very John Gemmell situation to be in. And actually, when he returned to Dumbarton at the age of, he must have been 38 or 37 when he signed for us for the second time, that was probably, we spoke about Bobby Lynn and his boxing training and really screwing the nut. That was when John Gemmell screwed the nut. Yeah. And it's such a shame that on his first start, he basically suffered a career-ending injury, and that was him him done, because I don't know how good he would have been for us that season, but you could see wee touches, like his first touch, so good. Just the know-how of how to position his body, so he'd either win a free kick because the defender would clamber over him, or they'd just bounce off him because he was absolutely ripped when he came back to us for the second spell. Like, there wasn't really an ounce of fat on him. It was just pure muscle. And there's not really anybody who could do the sort of job he did. And then he got the injury, and we brought in Russell McLean, a guy who, at the time of recording this, has scored back-to-back hat-tricks, but who did not look like he wanted to be at Dumbarton and did not contribute really anything. And you think, if we had a fully fit John Gemmell, he probably would have contributed more than Russell McLean did. And
he was also part of the Albion Rovers crazy gang as well. And I think if you think of like the crazy gang, no one likes us, we don't care. Gemmell is probably the sort of the number one player that comes to your mind from the Albion Rovers team. And then joined Stennismuir. Davy Irons signed him for Stennismuir, and I think that his 2 years at Stenny, what were the stats? I think it's about 29 league goals in 50 games. That's excellent for a striker. And it was just that Scott Booth coming in just wanted to, if we want to be euphemistic about it, wanted to go in a different direction from John, and he was ended up being sold back to the Rovers. In fact, I think he was sold back to them for his third spell, and ultimately it turned out fine because he went on to win his first and his only league title. But a really good player on his day, and someone who you think of him the Albion Rovers, and I
remember us going to Clifton Hill 2011-12. It was round about this time of year, so it was like December. It was a horrible dark afternoon at Clifton Hill, and he ripped us to shreds. That was a pretty good Albion Rovers team, but the place was rocking. I remember the Tannoy guy, just giving it the whole John the Beast demo, and just being like, this guy is making us look silly. Like he is just bullying this Dumbarton team around.
Always thought he's quite a sensitive big guy as well. I think he really needed to be told how great he was all the time. And there were sometimes in games where if he, like we mentioned there, I remember a game against Forfar that we lost, and the ball would go up, and he was up against, I think it was like Darren Dodds. It was like a really old Forfar defence. It was like Darren Dodds and Marvin Andrews with the centre backs, and just Dodds was just shoving him around to the stage where he wasn't even challenging for headers anymore because he thought, Dodds isn't going to make a mistake from just a ball coming up at him if there's no challenging him. And that was the frustration. That was perhaps frustration that he didn't impose himself on games often enough. But I think that, like it was said loads of times, when he was good, he was really good. Game against Annan in the Scottish Cup, we were in the League 1 at the time, they were a League 2 side, like a cold night down at Galabank, and just we were toiling, and he basically just took the game into his own hands. I think he got 3 assists in that day in a 4-2 win. Just brilliant stuff, aye. So he's the again, like your Ross Forbesies or your Stevie Murray's, the flawed genius that he's a term we've used very often in this, but he's in this team. So Fraser,
just a lot of fun as well. Like that's been a big criteria for this, I think, is just been fun. And John Gemmell is about as fun as it gets. On John Gemmell on his day, probably no player is more fun to watch.
Says the man who put Darren Gribben in his team.
Nobody said this team had to be good.
As a recap, Fraser, give us your Irn-Bru 11.
So my final 11, goalkeeper is Stephen Grindley, back 4 is Jamie Stevenson at right back, Mick Dunlop at left back, Pat Scullion and Joe Irn-Bru at centre half. Got Andy Rogers on right wing, Bobby Barr on left wing. Both linesmen are getting an earful this whole game. Kevin Nicol and the mercurial genius that is Davy Anderson in midfield, and then Darren Gribben and Jamie Longworth are tasked with providing the goals.
So in my team, I've gone for David McGurn in goals, Alan Reid at right back, Bob Harris at left back, Mark McLaughlin and Mick Dunlop in the middle, David Anderson and Ross Forbes both in centre midfield, Stevie Murray on the right wing, Bobby Lynn on the left wing, and Rory McAllister and John Gemmell up top. I think my team would beat your team.
Oh yeah.
That's not what we're here for. It's not about who's better. It's about vibes. It's about intangibles. It's about the abstract. And I think we've met the brief. I think we've both met the brief in different ways.
Yeah, I think that your team would out-football my team, but my team would really upset your fan base. And that's all I was looking for.
Ultimately, that's what it's all about. But, dear listener, what do you think about our teams? Who's got the better side? Should Darren Gribben have been included? What's your least favourite moment about facing Kevin Nicol? Please let us know. Get in touch with us on Twitter, leave a comment in the Discord, and someone else can tell us about it. But I think, Fraser, that's a lot of fun. There's a podcast I was looking forward to, and I'm glad we did it, because even though the trend passed ages ago, it's still good fun to just look back on your favourite players from your time when football is beginning to form inside your skull.
It's that thing, that tweet that went viral a wee while ago where it said men can just sit around in a pub and name old sports people and be really happy. Oh, yes.
Next time I see you, Fraser, let's go for a glass of beer and just talk about our favourite David Anderson moments.
Yes. And just talk about that Queen's Park team.
Oh, fantastic. But thank you, listener. I really enjoyed it, and I hope you did too. Thank you for your continued support from the Terrace Patreon. It really means a lot to us, and it gives myself and Fraser and all other guys involved the opportunity to just sit around and name people. It really is that simple. That's all. We could have cut this podcast down. We've been recording for like an hour 45 minutes. We could have cut this down to 5 minutes if we just basically named them, but where's the fun in doing that? Thank you very much. Take care, goodbye, and enjoy your football, but please do so respectfully. Thank you.